What is up? My name is Garrett at Yogurt on Twitter, YOOGRRTT. Thank you so much for tuning into the Now Annotation YouTube channel. Welcome back to another album review. Today we are talking about Young Lean's Poison Ivy mixtape EP album. I don't really know what to call this thing. It's very short, but I believe he's called it pretty much a mixtape leading into it, so we could probably coin that moniker. But yeah, this thing is coming off of his last one, which was Stranger. And that album actually was one of my favorites of the year, particularly the track Agony. That track is still in my rotation all the time. It's one of the songs that I enjoy waking up to. I think it's a sad song, but I think it also has a lot of like positive messaging as far as like just doing what you got to do, man, and handling your shit. And I think that message between Agony moving on into Yellow Man, on that track or on that album, those two tracks play together seamlessly. They ride into one another. I think they both push a similar message pretty fucking well. Some of the wordplay on there, just the way that he writes the hook on Agony with the whole like isolation caved in, like from that point on, like I adore you, the sound of your skin, like those lyrics always stuck with me in such a very powerful way. And that's kind of the beneficial loving factors of Young Lean himself. He's always just been this guy who has been very fucking weird, very different. I have had the pleasure of seeing him live. It is definitely, I mean, this was in like 2014, so that era of Young Lean, I think Warlord had just come out, and it was just a very fun, no, not Warlord, I think there might have been one right in that era right there that I'm forgetting about, but it was definitely after Unknown Memory, and that's what I mainly kind of remember him playing a lot of, as well as just some of the beautiful SoundCloud wave atmospheric raps that he became famous for on YouTube, etc. Seeing him live was such a cool experience to kind of see the artistry begin at that time period where he was kind of really pushing forward the idea, at least it came across this way on stage, that he really did care. He really wasn't just another SoundCloud rapper, even though his era of SoundCloud rap isn't like as like cringy as it kind of grew into, at least when you look at them as all as just poster childs. Like Young Lean is just different because he's not really from here. He's learning these American cultures through the internet and applying his own cloud rappy sound to it. And he has a great following, and I've been a huge fan of his nonstop. I mean, Stranger hit me in the face, and I didn't expect me to love that shit as much as I did and put it as high on my top list of last year. But with this one, I didn't feel as I listened to the two singles that he put out before this, the Crash Bandicoot, Something Else. Those were really fun. Me and Greg, my roommate, had listened to those a bunch. And again, I'm just a big Young Lean fan, but when it came down to this thing coming out, it felt I don't know if I want to use this word because it does sound a little bit harsh, but it did kind of feel like a chore to listen to it at times. It felt like he was really just riding off of those last two tracks that I just named, like Yellow Man and Agony. Like these fit tonally as well as the mood. Everything very much fits symphonically with those two tracks as standalones. And it still, even with those two being some of my favorites, this wasn't something that like was hitting me as hard as it did eventually, and it was on like the third or fourth listen that it finally all came circle, and I had been listening to the album fully through, and I just realized that this thing is very, very, very heady. There's a lot going on this. There's a lot that he's talking about. Let's jump into the track list real quick so I'm not just ambiguously talking about this thing, but getting into track number 1, we have Happy Feet, which was the lead-off single. There's a video on YouTube for that. It's a very good music video, just like all of Young Lean's work. It's just a work of art, for lack of better terms. Track number 2 is Friday the 13th. Track number 3 is French Hotel. Track number 4 is Silicone Wings. Track number 5 is Rope Man. Track number 6 is Trashy. Track number 7 is Sauron. And track number 8 is Bender Plus Plus Girlfriend. And it's really around this moment where shit gets really just beautiful, in my opinion. Like, there's something so atmospheric about his music, and that's such an ambiguous word to use when describing a project, and it's not even something that I'm necessarily that big of a fan of. But I think when you are talking about this, the god of, if you will, like the king of cloud rap, if you're talking about him, and in my opinion, that is Young Lean. That is like my introduction to it. That is, I think, a lot of the mainstream introduction to it. Not even that Young Lean is that mainstream anymore, in the sense that he's really taken on the idea that he is going to make a project that he wants to make, and he's probably always done that. But there's something very much coming through on that with this, where it was like, still with Stranger, there were songs that you could hear him maybe kind of talking to people who are only a fan of like old Young Lean songs, and like there's something about that, like the old fan base versus the new fan base as artists grow. Like Danny Brown has always talked about that on his albums, like they just want the old Danny Brown. Like you can kind of see that very much come across on Stranger, where there is still kind of a divide, where there is kind of two vocal paths that are talking to maybe two different audiences, or two narrators that are attempting to talk to two different audiences. With this, I feel like there's one person that he's talking to, and it's anyone who would get it. And it's not even in like a snobby way. It doesn't come across that way. It doesn't, like when I say heady, I don't mean that it's like, oh, your mind can't wrap around it. It's just that it felt very like incomplete at times when I would listen to it. And then finally, for whatever fucking reason, on like listening through it 4 or 5 times, by the time I got to track 6, I was like, oh, like I'm feeling a type of way about this that I wasn't prior. And I just think that it all just comes through. And that's really just the beauty of Mr. Young Lean, Mr. Jonathan Lean Dewar, which is his real and last name. There's just something so poetic and something so just authentically beautiful about just the music that he puts out there. And when you look at the catalog of like, when you start with like Vitamin Water on, or not Vitamin Water, what was it? Shit. Did I really? I'm thinking of that Oliver Francis song, Vitamin Water, but it's definitely Arizona Iced Tea that he was branding heavily with. And I apologize for saying Vitamin Water. Fuck those Dasani motherfuckers. But yeah, I just feel like when you are at such a level and you do look at a catalog of music like his, and you see these, like the first project with Unknown Memory or Unknown Death, and then you have Unknown Memory, and then you're working your way into Warlord, and that was where it kind of started getting, I think, a lot more about the art, more so than just about the music. And it was the whole artistry of Young Lean really became this thing, and it is this thing. It's a fucking zeitgeist in our culture, like with this hip-hop culture. Like, you really have this guy figureheading along with a lot of other people, but really when you think about weird, different, out there rap, especially in that 2012, 2013 era, Young Lean is the king of that. Like, he's making trap music essentially, but it sounds so atmospheric, it sounds cloudy, it's different. He's not really like talking about the same subject matter as like the Big Chirac movement at the time, but as far as symphonically and like with the beats going on, like it was all kind of in the same lane, but he was still fucking doing his thing to the utmost degree. And on this project, I just feel like he just kind of figured it out. I think he really did figure out the artistry, the artist of Young Lean, like what that is, what that should sound like, what he's trying to do. And for all I fucking know, he could change it on the next album and it would be just as impressive. But the fact that he kind of just took this niche that I really did hear on Agony and Yellow Man, and did enjoy across the board with those, there's just something to be said when you take a concept and run with it and go just tenfold. And I feel like that's exactly what this album does, is just relay a lot of sad, real, cool ways of putting them, but very like identifiable emotions, just putting them in words to where you really like the way he's been able to describe sadness and like agony and just other very common emotions that can just be said with those words. The way he describes some of those is just so impressive. And I really think he does put forward like a really good sense of like, hey, love is out there and like love is important. Like, I think Young Lean does a really good job of boiling down like all the bullshit that we're surrounded by, and just like being very good at dissecting all of the bullshit and just leaving the key points. And I think all of his songs bring forth a very good piece of, like, just a really good point. But also, I just think it brings a really good piece of, like, thematic evidence to whatever he is trying to portray. And it's just, it's really probably difficult to listen to, this album, if you're not familiar with his music, because it probably does come across as like what the fuck is this? Like, what is he trying to say? But I do promise that within this there is like a real, like, almost diary entry level, like 8 editions in this man's diary of him just talking about, like, even if it's just flexing with his friends, the ways that he's talking about it just sounds like, I feel like I can see him, like, living down the street from his best friend still on the same, like, street. Like, it just sounds so, like, personable, but also so relatable and also so home-like across this thing. I don't know. It's a really good project. I do not see this being in my top for the year. I will have to see. I think it's just too heavy of a concept for me to really wrap my head around it. But Bender, Plus Plus Girlfriend, Rope Man, Silicon Wings, Happy Feet, Friday the 13th, all of those are fucking amazing songs. So if you just have a good 30 minutes, I believe this thing is only about 30-40 minutes, definitely take a listen to it, because at the very least you're gonna walk away just being like wowed with the production. Young Gut and Young Sherman coming through always. And yeah, man, this thing is a beautiful piece of art that was crafted from a man with a creative ass mind, with a team of people, and they all created this crazy concept of an album, man. And it's a lot, but I think it's masterful the way that it comes together when it finally clicks, and if it ever does, you know what I mean? And finally, for me, whatever, I just caught myself listening to it, and I was like, This works. This really fucking works. I get what he's trying to do. It's just not what I necessarily wanted at the time, at this time. But again, that's probably why it wouldn't fall on like my top list. But I do understand, and I do like it, and I think it is something that it is at least worth listening to get a different perspective on the hip hop culture, current albums coming out. This doesn't really sound like anything else that's really been out there this year so far. Call me out if I'm wrong. Other than maybe like the track Heart Defects by Bobby Raps, the way Corbin's on there, like kind of gives me that same lean vibe. Just that whole tone of that track and mood of that track is a good reflection of what I think I see Lean trying to portray on this thing. Let me know in the comment section below what your favorite track is. Did you listen to it? Did you like it? Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Yogurt, YOOGRRTT. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, have a great day. That is all, folks.